Stop the deal before you sign page 47. The sentence was barely louder than a whisper, but inside the private dining room of the Sterling Grand Hotel in Manhattan, it felt louder than a thunderstorm. The pen stopped moving. The executives stopped talking. The lawyers stopped reviewing documents. And the billionaire CEO, who was seconds away from approving a $900 million acquisition, slowly looked up at the person nobody expected to speak. Maya Johnson, a black waitress wearing a simple white shirt and black apron, stood beside the table, holding a tray in her hands. To everyone in the room, she was supposed to be invisible. She was there to serve dinner, refill glasses, and quietly disappear into the background. She was not supposed to interrupt a conversation between billionaires, investors, and some of the most respected financial advisors in the country. But Maya had seen something they had missed. Jonathan Sterling, the 48-year-old billionaire CEO of Sterling Technologies, looked at her with disbelief. For the past 2 hours, he had been surrounded by experts. Accountants had reviewed the numbers. Attorneys had studied the documents. Executives had discussed the future of a company that could reshape his entire business empire. Everyone in the room believed the deal was a victory waiting to happen. The purchase would expand his company's influence, create new opportunities, and strengthen his position in the technology industry. The number on the contract represented more than money. It represented years of ambition, reputation, and legacy. But Maya's quiet warning created a silence that no one could ignore. Just one observation from someone who had been watching carefully. Jonathan glanced at the contract in front of him. Then he looked back at Maya. He had built his entire career trusting data, experience, and instinct. But something about her confidence made him pause. Because Maya was not speaking like someone guessing. She was speaking like someone who knew. What nobody at that table understood was that Maya Johnson was not just a waitress. Years earlier, she had been a finance student with a talent for finding patterns others overlooked. She had studied reports, analyzed numbers, and dreamed of building a career in the financial world. Life had taken her down a different path, but it never took away the way her mind worked. While others saw a tray in her hands, Maya saw details. While others saw a simple contract, she saw a question. And that night, in a room filled with people who had spent millions trying to predict the future, the person who noticed the truth was the one nobody thought to ask. Jonathan Sterling had spent his life believing the most valuable voice in the room belonged to the person with the highest title. But before the night ended, he was about to learn that sometimes the most important warning comes from the person standing quietly at the edge of the table. Long before Maya Johnson stood inside a private dining room surrounded by billionaires, lawyers, and executives, she had already learned one important lesson. The world often notices a person's position before it notices their potential. Every morning, Maya walked through the streets of Manhattan carrying a quiet determination that most people never saw. She arrived at the Sterling Grand Hotel before the city fully awakened, tied her black apron, prepared the dining area, and started another day as if her dreams had never been interrupted. To most guests, she was simply a waitress. Someone who brought coffee, arranged tables, and made sure every detail of their experience was perfect. But behind that apron was a story almost nobody knew. Years earlier, Maya had been studying finance at a respected university in New York. She was not just interested in numbers. She was fascinated by the stories hidden inside them. She could look at a financial report and notice patterns others ignored. She could compare information, identify unusual changes, and understand how small details could reveal much bigger problems. Her professors often told her she had a rare ability to see beyond the surface. Maya believed numbers were not just about money. They were about people, decisions, and consequences. But life changed the direction she expected to take. When her family needed support, Maya made a difficult choice. She stepped away from school and found steady work to help the people she loved. It was not the future she had imagined, but she never allowed disappointment to turn into bitterness. She carried the same discipline from her studies into everything she did. Whether she was preparing a table for a guest or organizing a busy dinner service, Maya paid attention to details. She noticed things others overlooked. She listened carefully. She remembered small pieces of information. Those habits followed her everywhere. Meanwhile, Jonathan Sterling lived in a completely different world. His days were filled with board meetings, investment decisions, and conversations about companies worth billions of dollars. He had built Sterling Technologies through ambition, intelligence, and relentless focus. People admired his confidence. They respected his ability to make difficult decisions. When Jonathan entered a room, people listened because his opinion could change the future of an entire industry. But success had also created a blind spot. He trusted titles. He trusted experience. He trusted people who sat at the table with him. He rarely considered that someone outside his circle could offer valuable insight. That was why Maya's voice surprised everyone that night. She was not supposed to understand a $900 million deal. She was not supposed to notice something experienced executives missed. Yet she had done exactly that. As the evening continued, Jonathan kept looking back at the contract in front of him. His instincts told him to continue. His pride told him not to question a decision that so many experts had approved. But another part of him remembered Maya's calm expression. She had not spoken like someone seeking attention. She had spoken like someone carrying a responsibility. And that was the detail Jonathan could not ignore. Because sometimes the people who know the most are not always the people sitting closest to power. Sometimes they are the ones quietly watching from the outside, waiting for the right moment to speak. Jonathan Sterling had spent decades building a reputation for making the right decision at the right moment. In the world of billion-dollar companies, hesitation was often considered weakness. Leaders were expected to move quickly, trust their instincts, and stay ahead of everyone else. That was exactly how Jonathan built Sterling Technologies into one of the most influential technology companies in the country. But inside the private dining room at Sterling Grand Hotel, something unusual happened. For the first time in years, the billionaire CEO paused because of someone nobody expected him to listen to. Maya Johnson. The room remained quiet after her warning. The executives looked uncomfortable. The attorneys exchanged uncertain glances. Richard Hayes, the CEO of the company Jonathan was preparing to acquire, smiled politely as if the interruption was nothing more than a misunderstanding. "I believe we have already reviewed every detail," Richard said confidently. "Our teams have spent months preparing this agreement." His words were designed to restore confidence. Normally, they would have worked. Jonathan was used to trusting experienced professionals. He had built his empire by surrounding himself with people who understood business at the highest level. But something kept bothering him. Maya had not spoken with arrogance. She had not tried to embarrass anyone. She had simply noticed something. Jonathan looked down at the documents again. Page 47. The same page Maya had mentioned. At first glance, it appeared completely normal. But after several minutes of careful review, Jonathan noticed a small detail. A projected expense adjustment did not match the information presented earlier in the agreement. It was not something most people would immediately recognize. It was a small inconsistency hidden inside hundreds of pages of financial information. His legal team began reviewing the section more closely. The atmosphere changed. The confidence that filled the room moments earlier started to disappear. Maya stood quietly near the entrance, watching without saying another word. She did not need recognition. She did not need everyone to know she was right. She only needed the truth to be examined. Jonathan looked at her again, this time differently. The woman standing there was no longer just an employee wearing a uniform. She was someone who had seen something that a room full of experts had missed. "How did you notice this?" Jonathan finally asked. Maya hesitated for a moment. She knew this was not a normal conversation. "I noticed the numbers did not tell the same story," she answered. The growth looked impressive, but the costs did not make sense together. Her explanation was simple, but that was what made it powerful. She was not guessing. She was analyzing. Richard attempted to redirect the conversation, but Jonathan raised his hand. For the first time that evening, he was not listening to the person with the highest position. He was listening to the person with the clearest observation. The deal that was supposed to be finalized in minutes was now being questioned because of one sentence from a waitress. And as Jonathan looked around the room, he realized something uncomfortable. Everyone there had been focused on closing the deal. Maya had been focused on understanding it. That difference changed everything. The room that once felt like a celebration of success now felt completely different. The elegant lights of Sterling Grand Hotel still reflected across the marble floor. The expensive dinner remained untouched on the table, but the confidence that filled the room earlier had disappeared. Everyone was looking at the same contract, the same numbers, and the same page that had almost been ignored. Page 47. A small section hidden inside a $900 million acquisition agreement had become the center of attention. Jonathan Sterling sat quietly, reading through the documents again. For a man known for making decisions quickly, this moment was unusual. He was not afraid of making difficult choices. He had built his entire career on taking risks. But this was different. This was not a question of courage. It was a question of whether he had been too confident to notice what was right in front of him. His legal team continued reviewing the information. The longer they looked, the more questions appeared. A financial projection that seemed impressive at first glance contained assumptions that did not fully match the company's actual performance. The growth numbers looked strong, but some of the underlying details told another story. Jonathan looked across the table at Richard Hayes. The other CEO remained composed, but the confidence in his expression had changed. There may have been some misunderstandings in the presentation, Richard said carefully. But Jonathan noticed something important. The people who had been the most certain about the deal were now the quietest in the room. Meanwhile, Maya Johnson remained near the dining area. She was still wearing the same black apron. She was still the waitress who had been serving dinner only moments earlier. Yet the atmosphere around her had completely changed. Nobody was looking through her anymore. They were looking at her. Jonathan studied her carefully. He wanted to understand how someone outside the world of billion-dollar negotiations had noticed something his team had missed. "Maya," he said, "where did you learn to analyze information like this?" The question surprised her. For most of the evening, she had expected to return to her normal duties and disappear into the background. "I studied finance before I started working here," she explained. "I always enjoyed finding patterns. Sometimes numbers reveal problems before people do." Her answer was simple, but Jonathan understood the meaning behind it. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was describing something she naturally did. She had spent years developing a skill that remained hidden because people judged her by her job instead of her ability. Richard attempted to move the conversation forward, suggesting they could revisit the details later. But Jonathan stopped him. The decision that could affect thousands of employees and investors was too important to rush. For the first time in his career, he chose patience over pressure. He chose understanding over pride. The signing ceremony was postponed. The $900 million deal that everyone expected to be completed that night was no longer moving forward. As the executives gathered their documents, Jonathan looked at Maya one more time. A waitress had not interrupted a business meeting. She had protected a decision. And the billionaire CEO who once believed the most valuable voices belonged to people with the biggest titles had just learned that wisdom does not always come from the head of the table. Sometimes, it comes from the person standing quietly beside it. The decision to pause the $900 million acquisition changed everything inside Sterling Grand Hotel. What was supposed to be a celebration of expansion became a night of questions, uncertainty, and unexpected discoveries. The executives who had arrived expecting to witness a historic business victory were now sitting quietly, reviewing documents they believed they already understood. But Jonathan Sterling was not focused on the lost opportunity of the evening. He was focused on the reason it stopped. Maya Johnson. For years, Jonathan had surrounded himself with some of the most experienced professionals in the business world. Financial analysts, attorneys, consultants, and executives had built careers studying markets and predicting outcomes. Yet one woman wearing a black apron had noticed something they all missed. That thought stayed with him. The next morning, Jonathan arrived at Sterling Technologies earlier than usual. His office overlooked the Manhattan skyline, a view that represented everything he had achieved. The company was worth billions. His name was recognized around the world. But for the first time in years, he was not thinking about growth or competition. He was thinking about perspective. He asked his assistant to gather information about Maya Johnson, not because he wanted to reward her immediately, not because he wanted to create a public story. He wanted to understand. What he discovered surprised him. Maya had once been one of the most promising students in her finance program. Her professors described her as someone who could see connections between numbers that others ignored. She was not simply good at calculations. She understood what those numbers meant for real people and real businesses. But when her family faced difficult circumstances, Maya stepped away from her studies and chose responsibility over her own plans. She did not announce her sacrifice. She did not ask anyone to recognize what she had given up. She simply continued moving forward. Jonathan read through her background several times. The woman he had barely noticed during dinner had spent years developing a skill that could have placed her inside the very meetings where decisions worth hundreds of millions were made. Instead, she was serving the people sitting at those tables. The irony was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Maya returned to her normal routine at Sterling Grand Hotel. She did not expect anything to change. She still prepared tables, greeted guests, and completed her responsibilities with the same professionalism she had always shown. She did not see herself as someone special. She believed she had only done what was right. When Jonathan visited the restaurant later that week, he noticed something he had missed before. He noticed how carefully Maya listened to every guest. He noticed how she remembered small details. He noticed how naturally she solved problems before they became bigger issues. "You have a rare ability," Jonathan told her. Maya looked surprised. "I just pay attention," she replied. But Jonathan understood something important. Paying attention was not a small thing. In a world filled with noise, observation was a valuable skill. The billionaire CEO who once believed intelligence only belonged in executive offices had learned a lesson he would never forget. Talent does not disappear because people fail to recognize it. Sometimes, the greatest ability is hidden behind the most ordinary appearance. And sometimes, the person serving the table is the person who sees the entire picture. The investigation into the $900 million acquisition continued for several days, and the deeper Jonathan Sterling looked, the more he realized how close he had come to making a decision that could have changed the future of his company. The problem was not a simple mistake. It was a pattern of information that had been presented in a way that created confidence while hiding important details. For a man who built his reputation on seeing opportunities before others did, this discovery was difficult to accept. Jonathan had always believed that experience gave him an advantage. He believed that after decades in business, he could recognize the difference between a good opportunity and a bad one. But now he had to face an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes confidence could become the very thing that prevented someone from seeing clearly. The review team continued examining the acquisition documents, and their findings confirmed what Maya Johnson had noticed that night. Several key assumptions in the agreement needed further evaluation. The deal was not what it first appeared to be. Jonathan sat in his office overlooking Manhattan, reading the final report in silence. The city below continued moving as usual, but his perspective had changed. He thought about the room at Sterling Grand Hotel. He thought about the executives who spoke with confidence. He thought about the experts who had studied the numbers. And he thought about Maya, the one person who simply paid attention. The realization stayed with him. She had not discovered the issue because she had more authority than everyone else. She discovered it because she was willing to look closer. Jonathan decided to meet with her again. This time, he did not invite her to a formal business meeting. He met her at a quiet cafe near the hotel, away from executives and corporate discussions. He wanted to speak with her as a person, not as a billionaire CEO. "I spent years believing the most valuable ideas came from the people with the most experience," Jonathan said. "But you reminded me that insight can come from anywhere." Maya listened carefully. She did not appear impressed by his position or his apology. She simply appreciated the honesty behind his words. "Sometimes people do not need more information," Maya replied. "They need someone willing to notice what others ignore." Jonathan understood exactly what she meant. The lesson was not only about business. It was about people. For years, he had looked at employees through their roles. He saw titles, responsibilities, and levels of authority. Maya had shown him that every person carried experiences and abilities that might never appear on a resume. After their conversation, Jonathan made a decision that surprised many people inside Sterling Technologies. He began changing the way important discussions were handled. He encouraged employees from different departments to share their perspectives. He created opportunities for people who were often overlooked to have their voices heard. Some executives questioned the change. They wondered why the CEO who once trusted only traditional expertise was now searching for ideas from unexpected places. Jonathan never complicated the answer. He simply said that the biggest mistake a leader could make was assuming they had already heard everything worth hearing. And every time he remembered that night at the hotel, he remembered one simple truth. The most important voice in the room is not always the loudest one. Sometimes, it is the quiet voice that notices what everyone else missed. The news about the postponed acquisition spread quickly throughout the business world. Analysts questioned the decision. Investors wanted answers. Competitors watched closely, waiting to see what Jonathan Sterling would do next. For many people, the situation looked like a problem. For Jonathan, it became something different. It became a lesson, a reminder that even the most successful people can miss what is right in front of them. Inside Sterling Technologies, the atmosphere began to change. Employees noticed that their CEO was asking different questions. Instead of only asking about profits and performance, Jonathan started asking about the people behind the results. He wanted to know how decisions affected different teams. He wanted to hear opinions from employees who were rarely invited into important conversations. It was a change many people did not expect from a leader known for being focused, demanding, and extremely private. Some executives believed it was only a temporary reaction to the acquisition problem. They assumed Jonathan would eventually return to his old ways. But those closest to him noticed something deeper. The billionaire CEO was not trying to create a better image. He was genuinely changing the way he viewed success. Meanwhile, Maya Johnson continued her life at Sterling Grand Hotel. She never expected the attention that followed after that night. She did not seek interviews. She did not tell people she had saved a major business decision. She simply returned to her work and continued treating every guest with the same respect. That was one of the things Jonathan admired most about her. Maya did not see herself as someone who had done something extraordinary. She believed she had only done what anyone should do when they noticed something important. She spoke because staying silent would have been easier, but it would not have been right. A few weeks later, Jonathan invited Maya to Sterling Technologies headquarters. For the first time, she walked through the same building where decisions worth billions were made. The difference was that she was not entering as someone serving the people inside. They looked at Maya and saw someone whose background did not match the traditional image of a financial expert. But Jonathan saw something else. He saw discipline. He saw intelligence. He saw a person who had developed valuable skills despite never receiving the opportunities she deserved. The smartest person in the room is not always the person with the highest title, Jonathan told his team. Those words represented a change far greater than any business decision. For years, Jonathan had built a company by finding talent, but he had only been looking in familiar places. Maya reminded him that talent does not always announce itself. Sometimes it works quietly. Sometimes it stands nearby. Sometimes it wears a uniform and waits for someone to finally listen. And as Jonathan looked at the company he had built, he understood something that would shape his leadership forever. A great leader does not just recognize success. A great leader recognizes potential before the world does. The changes inside Sterling Technologies continued to grow, but the biggest transformation was not happening in the company offices. It was happening in the way people saw value. For years, the organization had been built around titles, experience, and traditional measures of success. The people in executive positions were the ones whose voices carried the most weight. But Jonathan Sterling had started to understand that great ideas did not always arrive through the usual channels. Sometimes, they came from unexpected places. Sometimes, they came from people who had never been invited into the conversation before. That lesson changed the way he approached leadership. 1 month after the acquisition review, Jonathan created a new initiative inside Sterling Technologies. The goal was simple: give employees at every level a chance to share ideas, observations, and concerns directly with leadership. At first, some executives were skeptical. He had almost made a $900 million mistake because he assumed the most important information would always come from the most powerful people in the room. Maya Johnson had proven otherwise. Meanwhile, Maya faced her own decision. After years of putting her dreams aside, she finally had an opportunity to return to the world she once imagined for herself. Jonathan offered her a position in the company's financial analysis program, not as a favor and not as a reward for helping him. He offered it because she had earned the opportunity through her ability. Maya was hesitant at first. She had spent so much time believing her path had changed permanently that stepping into a corporate environment felt unfamiliar. She wondered if people would see her as someone who belonged there or only as the waitress who happened to notice something important. Jonathan understood that concern. "Your ability did not appear the night you helped us," he told her. "It was there long before anyone noticed." Those words meant more to Maya than any offer could, because for years, she had not needed someone to create her value. She needed someone willing to recognize it. When Maya eventually joined the financial team at Sterling Technologies, she entered the same building where decisions worth billions were made. But this time, she was not carrying a tray. She was carrying ideas. Some employees were surprised by her background. Others were inspired by it. She became a reminder that talent does not always follow a predictable path. Jonathan watched her grow within the company, but he also learned from her every day. He learned that leadership was not about having every answer. It was about creating an environment where the right answers could be found. Months earlier, Maya had stood quietly at the edge of a table while powerful people discussed the future of a massive deal. Nobody expected her voice to matter. Nobody expected her observation to change anything. But now, the same voice that had once been overlooked was helping shape important decisions. The biggest change was not that a waitress entered a corporate office. The biggest change was that a billionaire finally understood the importance of listening. Because true leadership is not measured by how many people listen to you. It is measured by whether you are willing to listen when the right person speaks. Months after the night at Sterling Grand Hotel, the story that changed Jonathan Sterling's perspective became something much bigger than a single business decision. It became a reminder inside Sterling Technologies that value could exist anywhere, even in places where people rarely looked. The company continued to grow, but the way Jonathan measured success had completely changed. He still cared about innovation, progress, and building a stronger future. But now he understood that a company was not created only by executives making decisions in private offices. It was created by every person who contributed their effort, knowledge, and perspective every day. Maya Johnson continued building her new path inside Sterling Technologies. She was no longer the waitress, standing quietly near important conversations. She was now part of those conversations. But despite the new position, she remained the same person. She still listened carefully. She still asked thoughtful questions. She still believed the smallest details could reveal the biggest truths. Her success did not come from changing who she was. It came from finally being in a place where people recognized what had always been there. Jonathan often reflected on the moment when he almost signed the acquisition agreement. He remembered the confidence in the room. He remembered the experts who believed everything was already understood. And he remembered the quiet voice that changed the direction of his company. Maya had not stopped the deal because she wanted attention. She had not spoken because she wanted power. She spoke because she understood the responsibility that came with seeing something others missed. That was the lesson Jonathan carried with him. Knowledge means little if people are not willing to listen. Over time, Jonathan became known not only as a successful CEO, but as a leader who valued different perspectives. He encouraged his teams to question assumptions, examine details, and speak when something did not feel right. Some people inside the company said the biggest change at Sterling Technologies was not a new product or a new investment. It was the culture. It was the understanding that every person had something valuable to contribute. Maya's journey also inspired others who felt overlooked. Employees who once stayed silent began sharing their ideas. People who believed their backgrounds limited their opportunities started seeing new possibilities. Her story showed that talent does not always arrive with a title, a corner office, or a long list of achievements. Sometimes it arrives quietly and waits for someone to recognize it. Years later, when Jonathan thought about his greatest business decisions, the $900 million acquisition was not the moment he remembered most. He remembered the moment before it. The moment when he almost ignored the one person who saw what everyone else missed. Because that moment taught him something no financial report ever could. A person's value is not determined by their position. It is revealed through their actions, their courage, and their willingness to do what is right when nobody expects them to. Maya Johnson never needed a seat at the table to prove she belonged. She earned that seat by showing the world what she already knew. The most powerful voice is not always the one with the highest title. Sometimes, it is the quiet voice that has been waiting for someone to finally listen.